The sun hung high in the sky, casting golden rays over an ancient monument that stood proudly amidst the bustling city. The structure was a relic of another time, its weathered stones telling stories of battles fought and civilizations long gone. Tourists milled about, their cameras clicking away as they tried to capture memories of this historic site. Among them was Marcus, a tall, broad-shouldered guard dressed in a crisp uniform. His job was simple: stand by the entrance, keep watch, and ensure no one crossed the boundaries set for safety. Marcus had been stationed at this spot for years. He knew every crack in the stone steps leading up to the monument, every bird that nested in its crevices, and even the rhythm of the wind as it swept through the open space. But today felt different. There was a strange energy in the air, not from the monument itself, but from the people visiting it. A group of school children giggled loudly nearby, pointing at the intricate carvings on the walls. An elderly couple sat on a bench, quietly admiring the view. And then there was Liam, a tourist who seemed determined to make his presence known. Liam was unlike the other visitors. While most tourists moved with quiet reverence, he bounced around like a child let loose in a candy store. His backpack jingled with souvenirs he collected earlier that day, and his camera hung loosely around his neck, unused. Instead of snapping pictures, Liam wandered aimlessly, taking in the sights with wide-eyed curiosity. He stopped occasionally to chat with fellow tourists or examine random objects scattered across the grounds. At first glance, he appeared harmless, just another traveler eager to soak up the experience. But beneath his cheerful demeanor lay a streak of mischief waiting to surface. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself growing restless. Lunchtime had come and gone, but he hadn't eaten anything since morning. His stomach growled softly, though he did his best to ignore it. Standing guard required focus, after all, and distractions were unacceptable. Still, he couldn't help glancing wistfully at the food stalls just outside the monument's gates. The smell of freshly baked bread wafted through the air, mingling with the scent of grilled meat and spices. It made his hunger even harder to bear. That's when Liam approached him, holding something wrapped in brown paper. It was a sandwich, still warm and fragrant. Marcus caught a whiff of its contents: savory ham, melted cheese, and crisp lettuce, and his mouth watered involuntarily. For a moment, he considered asking Liam where he bought it, but before he could speak, the tourist grinned slyly. "Hungry?" Liam asked casually, waving the sandwich teasingly in front of Marcus's face. Marcus frowned, unsure how to respond. Was this some kind of joke? Part of him wanted to laugh it off, but another part bristled at being mocked while on duty. Still, he said nothing, choosing instead to maintain his stoic expression. After all, guards weren't supposed to engage with such antics, or so he thought. Little did he know, this seemingly innocent act of teasing would soon spiral into something far more unexpected and unforgettable. Liam's grin widened as he noticed the flicker of annoyance cross Marcus's face. The guard's silence only encouraged him, sparking a mischievous idea in his mind. "Oh, come on," Liam said with exaggerated enthusiasm, taking a small bite of the sandwich. He chewed slowly, savoring the flavors while making sure Marcus could see every detail. "This is amazing. You sure you don't want some?" he added, holding out the sandwich as if offering it to a stubborn child. Marcus clenched his jaw but remained silent. His training had drilled one rule into him: never let your emotions show. No matter how irritating this tourist became, Marcus knew better than to rise to the bait. Still, it was hard not to feel humiliated as other visitors began to notice what was happening. A young couple nearby exchanged amused glances, and a teenager snickered behind his phone, clearly recording the scene. Even the school children stopped their chatter to watch, giggling at the odd interaction between the serious guard and the playful traveler. But Liam wasn't done yet. Emboldened by the growing attention, he took another step closer to Marcus, waving the sandwich like a prizefighter taunting his opponent. "You know, skipping meals isn't healthy," Liam teased, his tone light but persistent. What kind of example are you setting for these kids? He gestured toward the group of school children, who erupted into laughter at his comment. Marcus felt his cheeks flush with embarrassment, though he tried to hide it beneath his professional demeanor. To make matters worse, Liam decided to take things up a notch. He tore off a tiny piece of bread from the sandwich and tossed it toward Marcus, letting it land near his boots. "Here, buddy," Liam said with mock generosity. "Even pigeons get fed." The crowd chuckled at the comparison, and someone shouted, "Give him a break." Whether they were siding with Marcus or egging Liam on was unclear. Either way, the situation was spiraling out of control. Despite the rising tension, Marcus refused to budge. His years of experience taught him that reacting would only escalate the situation further. Instead, he stood rooted to the spot, his eyes fixed straight ahead, as if Liam didn't exist. Inside, however, his frustration simmered. Every toss of bread, every snide remark, chipped away at his patience. He reminded himself that this was part of the job. Dealing with difficult people came with the territory. But deep down, he couldn't help feeling disrespected. The teasing continued unabated. Liam tossed another crumb, then another, each one landing just inches away from Marcus's feet. Some tourists began to clap rhythmically, turning the spectacle into something resembling performance art. Others whispered nervously among themselves, urging Liam to stop before things got out of hand. But Liam seemed oblivious, or perhaps he simply didn't care. His confidence grew with every passing second, fueled by the laughter and cheers of the crowd. As the moments dragged on, Marcus's resolve wavered ever so slightly. He glanced down at the crumbs scattered around him, then back up at Liam, whose grin showed no signs of fading. For a brief instant, their eyes met, and Marcus saw something unexpected, not malice, but amusement. It was as if Liam truly believed this was all harmless fun, a light-hearted prank meant to entertain rather than offend. But harmless or not, Marcus knew he couldn't let this go on indefinitely. Something had to give, and soon. Unbeknownst to both men, the atmosphere around them was shifting subtly. The air grew heavier, charged with an energy neither could quite explain. Tourists shifted uncomfortably, sensing that the playful banter might be edging toward something more serious. And yet, no one stepped forward to intervene. They were too captivated by the unfolding drama, unsure whether to laugh, cheer, or brace themselves for what might happen next. Whatever it was, one thing was certain. The day was about to take a turn none of them could have anticipated. The playful atmosphere that had once surrounded Liam and Marcus began to shift, growing heavier with each passing second. What started as harmless teasing was now teetering on the edge of something far more serious. The crowd, which had initially laughed and clapped along, grew quieter, their expressions shifting from amusement to unease. Some tourists exchanged worried glances, while others whispered warnings to Liam, urging him to stop before things spiraled out of control. "Hey, maybe you should cut it out," a woman nearby said softly, her voice tinged with concern. She glanced nervously at Marcus, whose rigid stance and clenched fists spoke volumes about his mounting frustration. Another man chimed in, "Yeah, dude, he's just doing his job. Don't push it." But Liam either didn't hear them or chose to ignore their advice. His confidence seemed unshakable, bolstered by the attention he was receiving. He stepped even closer to Marcus, holding the sandwich inches from the guard's face. "Come on, big guy," Liam said with a smirk, his tone still light but edged with provocation. "You can't tell me you're not even a little tempted. Look at this masterpiece." He waved the sandwich dramatically, as if presenting it on a stage. Marcus's patience was fraying like a rope pulled too tight. Each taunt, each crumb tossed at his feet, felt like another weight added to an already unbearable load. His training screamed at him to stay calm, to maintain composure no matter what. But inside, a storm was brewing. Years of discipline battled against the raw instinct to react, to put an end to this ridiculous display once and for all. For a moment, he imagined grabbing the sandwich from Liam's hand, and tossing it aside, just to shut him up. The thought alone brought a fleeting sense of satisfaction, but he quickly pushed it away. Acting on impulse would only make things worse. Liam, however, misinterpreted Marcus's silence as weakness. Emboldened by the lack of response, he leaned in even closer, his grin widening. "You know what? I think you're scared," he teased, his voice carrying just enough mockery to strike a nerve. "Scared to admit you want it. Scared to break the rules." The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting, drawing a collective intake of breath from the onlookers. That was the final straw. Something inside Marcus snapped. Without thinking, he lunged forward, his arm shooting out in an attempt to snatch the sandwich from Liam's grasp. The sudden movement startled everyone, including Liam, who stumbled backward in surprise. The sandwich slipped from his fingers and tumbled to the ground, landing with a soft thud on the dusty pavement. For a split second, there was complete silence, a stunned pause as everyone processed what had just happened. The crowd erupted into murmurs, some laughing nervously, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Marcus froze, instantly regretting his actions. He hadn't meant to move so aggressively. It was a reflex born of frustration and embarrassment. Now, all eyes were on him, judging his lapse in professionalism. His cheeks burned with shame, and he straightened up quickly, trying to regain his composure. Liam, meanwhile, looked genuinely shocked. The playful glint in his eye faded, replaced by uncertainty. He stared at the fallen sandwich, then back at Marcus, realizing for the first time that he might have gone too far. "Whoa, okay," Liam muttered, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I didn't mean to." Before he could finish, a low rumble interrupted him. It started faintly, almost imperceptible, like distant thunder rolling across the horizon. But within seconds, the sound grew louder, vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. Tourists gasped and turned toward the source of the disturbance, the ancient monument itself. Cracks began forming along its base, snaking upward like veins on weathered skin. Dust billowed into the air, and chunks of stone broke free, revealing a hidden compartment behind a crumbling facade. For a moment, everyone forgot about the sandwich, the teasing, and the tension between Liam and Marcus. All eyes were fixed on the monument, where history, and perhaps something far greater, was beginning to awaken. Whatever camaraderie or animosity had existed moments ago dissolved into awe and apprehension. No one knew what was coming next, but one thing was clear: this day would be remembered for much more than a playful prank gone wrong. The low rumble that had begun moments earlier grew louder, shaking the ground beneath everyone's feet. Tourists stumbled backward, their cameras forgotten as they stared wide-eyed at the ancient monument. The cracks spreading across its base widened, sending clouds of dust swirling into the air. Chunks of stone tumbled to the ground with dull thuds, revealing something hidden within, a dark opening that seemed to breathe mystery and history all at once. Marcus snapped out of his momentary shock, instinctively stepping forward to assess the situation. His training kicked in, overriding the embarrassment and frustration he'd felt just moments ago. "Everyone, step back," he shouted, raising his arms to usher the crowd away from the crumbling structure. But his voice was nearly drowned out by the gasps and murmurs of disbelief rippling through the group. Some people obeyed, retreating cautiously, while others stood frozen, unable to tear their eyes away from the unfolding spectacle. Liam, still holding his hands up in a half-hearted gesture of surrender, took an involuntary step closer to the monument. His earlier bravado had vanished, replaced by a mix of awe and curiosity. He squinted at the exposed cavity in the stone, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Inside, faint carvings glimmered dimly in the sunlight, symbols and patterns etched intricately into the walls of the hidden compartment. At the center lay a small wooden chest, its surface weathered but intact, as if waiting patiently for centuries to be discovered. "What is that?" Liam whispered, more to himself than anyone else. His voice carried just enough to catch Marcus's attention. The guard hesitated, torn between maintaining order and investigating the mysterious find. Protocol dictated that he should secure the area immediately, but there was something undeniably magnetic about the chest. It wasn't just an artifact. It felt alive, pulsing with untold stories and secrets. Before Marcus could decide what to do, Liam moved again, drawn inexplicably toward the opening. "Hey, stop!" Marcus barked, reaching out to grab Liam's arm. But Liam sidestepped him deftly, muttering under his breath, "Relax, I'm just looking." His tone was quieter now, almost reverent, as though even he understood the gravity of the moment. The crowd pressed in behind them, craning their necks to get a better view. A few tourists began snapping photos again, their flashes illuminating the dusty haze around the monument. Someone muttered, "This is insane," while another whispered, "Do you think it's treasure?" Excitement buzzed in the air, mingling with the lingering tension from earlier. For now, the teasing sandwich incident felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the monumental discovery unfolding before their eyes. Liam crouched down near the edge of the opening, peering inside with fascination. The wooden chest rested on a bed of loose stones, its lid slightly ajar. Without thinking, he reached out, his fingers brushing against the rough surface. The instant he touched it, a strange sensation shot through him, a tingling warmth that spread from his fingertips to his chest. He jerked his hand back reflexively, staring at the chest as if it might leap out and bite him. Marcus noticed the reaction and frowned. "Don't touch anything," he warned sharply, stepping closer. "We don't know what that it is or how old it is. You could damage it, or worse." But Liam couldn't look away. There was something about the chest that called to him, urging him to open it despite the warnings. The symbols carved into its sides seemed familiar somehow, though he couldn't place where he'd seen them before. Was it a language, a map, or something entirely different? His mind raced with possibilities, each one more thrilling and unsettling than the last. As the two men stood there, locked in a silent standoff over the mysterious artifact, the ground trembled once more. This time, the vibration was sharper, more deliberate, as if the earth itself were responding to their presence. Dust rained down from above, and a few larger stones dislodged from the monument's facade, crashing to the ground nearby. The crowd let out a collective gasp, some people backing away further while others edged closer, unable to resist the pull of the unknown. "Okay, this has gone far enough," Marcus said firmly, grabbing Liam by the shoulder and pulling him back. "We need to clear the area now." His voice left no room for argument, but Liam barely registered the words. His focus remained fixed on the chest, his heart pounding with equal parts fear and excitement. Whatever was inside, he realized, wasn't just a relic of the past. It was something powerful, something that demanded respect. And yet, as much as Marcus tried to assert control, neither of them could deny the truth. They had stumbled upon something extraordinary. Whether it would bring wonder or, ignoring Marcus's firm grip on his shoulder, Liam shrugged free and leaned closer to the mysterious chest. His curiosity burned brighter than any sense of caution. "Just one look," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to Marcus. The wooden box sat there, unassuming yet radiating an aura that felt almost alive. Its surface was rough and worn, but the carvings etched into its lid gleamed faintly in the sunlight, as if daring him to uncover their secrets. Marcus hesitated, torn between stopping Liam and investigating the artifact himself. He glanced over his shoulder at the crowd, which had grown restless. Some tourists were filming the scene with their phones, while others whispered nervously about what the chest might contain. A child clung to her mother's leg, pointing at the monument and asking, "Is it magic?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, but it seemed to echo in everyone's minds. Liam didn't wait for permission, or even a moment of calm. With trembling hands, he reached out again, this time gripping the edges of the chest firmly. The tingling sensation returned, stronger now, coursing through his arms like an electric current. For a brief second, he wondered if he should stop, but the pull was irresistible. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted the lid. The instant the chest opened, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Inside lay a collection of ancient artifacts. Gold coins glinted softly in the light. Faded scrolls rolled tightly like sleeping serpents, and nestled among them was a crystal orb no larger than a fist. Unlike the other items, the orb seemed to pulse with an inner light, casting shimmering reflections across the dusty ground. It was mesmerizing, beautiful, and undeniably strange. "Don't touch anything," Marcus barked again, stepping forward to intervene. But it was too late. Before anyone could react, Liam's fingers closed around the orb. The moment his skin made contact, the atmosphere changed dramatically. A sharp breeze swept through the area, carrying with it whispers in a language no one recognized. The sky darkened unnaturally, clouds gathering overhead despite the clear weather just moments before. The wind howled louder, whipping dust into swirling vortexes that stung exposed skin. Tourists screamed and backed away, shielding their faces from the chaos. Marcus shouted orders, trying to regain control of the situation, but his voice was lost in the roar of the wind. Even he couldn't help but stare at the orb in Liam's hand, now glowing brightly enough to rival the sun. It floated upward, hovering above Liam's head as though drawn by an invisible force. The crowd froze, watching in stunned silence as the orb projected images into the air, visions of battles fought, kingdoms rising and falling, and civilizations long forgotten. Liam stood rooted to the spot, his eyes wide with wonder and fear. The visions played out like a movie, each frame more vivid than the last. He saw warriors clad in armor charging into battle, priests chanting prayers beneath starlit skies, and massive structures crumbling into ruins. And then, unexpectedly, the images shifted. They showed him standing exactly where he was now, holding the orb, surrounded by destruction. Fires raged in the background, and people ran in panic. The vision ended abruptly, leaving Liam breathless and shaken. What is happening?" he stammered, his voice barely audible over the wind. He turned to Marcus, who looked equally bewildered. For once, the stern guard had nothing to say. His usual composure had cracked, replaced by genuine alarm. The orb pulsed again, brighter this time, and the whispers grew louder, overlapping in a cacophony of voices. It was as though the past itself was speaking, warning them, or perhaps pleading with them. The ground trembled violently, forcing everyone to steady themselves. Cracks spread further along the base of the monument, threatening to bring the entire structure down. "We need to put it back," Marcus yelled, finally finding his voice. Now, his tone left no room for argument, and for once, Liam didn't resist. Whatever excitement or fascination he'd felt earlier had vanished, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread. Clutching the orb tightly, he nodded, his face pale with realization. As they moved toward the chest, the wind intensified, tugging at their clothes and hair. The crowd scattered, some running toward the exits while others crouched behind nearby benches, shielding themselves from the supernatural storm. No one knew what would happen next, but one thing was clear: the orb was far more powerful and dangerous than anyone could have imagined. Every second it remained out of its resting place felt like a step closer to catastrophe. With the orb still glowing fiercely in his hand, Liam hurried back to the chest, his earlier bravado completely gone. Marcus followed closely behind, his eyes darting between the pulsating crystal and the crumbling monument. The ground trembled violently beneath their feet, and the whispers in the air grew louder, overlapping in a chaotic symphony of voices that seemed to come from all directions. It was as though the past itself was alive, screaming to be heard, or perhaps warning them to stop. Liam knelt beside the chest, his hands trembling as he placed the orb carefully inside. The moment it touched the bottom, the light dimmed slightly, and the wind eased just enough for everyone to catch their breath. But the orb wasn't done yet. Its glow flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows across the dusty ground. The carvings on the chest's lid began to shimmer faintly, responding to the artifact's energy. It was clear that simply returning the orb wasn't going to end this. It felt like it had awakened something far greater than anyone could comprehend. Marcus grabbed Liam's arm, pulling him back to his feet. "Close it," he ordered sharply, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Now." His tone left no room for hesitation, and Liam nodded quickly, reaching out with shaky hands to lower the lid. As soon as the chest was sealed, the unnatural phenomena intensified one last time before abruptly stopping. The wind died down, the sky cleared, and the whispers faded into silence. For a moment, there was nothing but stillness, a stark contrast to the storm-like chaos that had consumed the area moments ago. The crowd, which had scattered during the commotion, slowly began to gather again, their faces pale with shock and confusion. Some people clung to each other, whispering nervously about what they had just witnessed. Others stood frozen, staring at the chest, as if expecting it to burst open again. A few tourists approached cautiously, cameras raised, but most kept their distance, unsure whether the danger had truly passed. Liam let out a shaky breath, running a hand through his disheveled hair. He looked at Marcus, guilt etched across his face. I didn't mean for this to happen," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought it was just, I don't know, a cool discovery or something." Marcus didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his attention to the chest, inspecting it carefully. The cracks in the monument's base had widened further, exposing more of the hidden compartment. The wooden box sat snugly within, its presence both ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. Marcus knew better than to touch it again, not after what they'd just experienced. But he couldn't shake the feeling that leaving it here would be a mistake. Whatever power the orb held, it wasn't meant to stay buried forever. "We need to call someone," Marcus said finally, glancing at Liam. "Authorities. Experts. Whoever deals with this kind of thing." He gestured vaguely toward the chest, unable to find the words to describe what they had uncovered. Archaeologists, historians, or maybe even scientists who specialized in ancient artifacts. Either way, this was far beyond his expertise or responsibility. Liam nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, good idea," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. He knew he was partly to blame for everything that had happened. If he hadn't teased Marcus, if he hadn't reached for the sandwich, if he hadn't opened the chest, none of this would have happened. The weight of his actions pressed heavily on his shoulders, and for the first time, he realized how reckless he'd been. As Marcus pulled out his radio to report the situation, Liam took a step back, surveying the scene around him. The monument stood silent once again, its secrets temporarily locked away. But the images projected by the orb lingered in his mind. The battles, the priests, the destruction. And then, the vision of himself holding the orb amidst chaos. Was it a warning? A prophecy? Or just a fragment of history replaying itself? Whatever it was, Liam knew one thing for certain. He couldn't forget it. Nor could he ignore the lesson he'd learned today. That some things were better left undisturbed. History, it seemed, wasn't just a collection of stories carved into stone. It was alive, breathing, waiting for someone to listen. And sometimes it demanded respect. As reinforcements arrived and authorities cordoned off the area, Liam stood quietly, watching as experts carefully examined the chest. Marcus gave him a long, hard look before turning away to assist the officials. There was no anger in his gaze, only exhaustion, and perhaps a hint of shared understanding. Both men knew they had witnessed something extraordinary, something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. By the time authorities arrived, the area around the monument had transformed into a hive of activity. Police officers cordoned off the site with bright yellow tape, while archaeologists and historians in wide-brimmed hats examined the chest with cautious fascination. Cameras clicked incessantly as journalists jostled for the best angle to capture the mysterious artifact that had caused such chaos just moments earlier. The crowd of tourists lingered nearby, reluctant to leave despite the growing number of officials urging them to disperse. Liam stood at the edge of the commotion, his backpack slung loosely over one shoulder. He watched silently as experts carefully lifted the wooden chest from its resting place, wrapping it in protective padding before placing it into a secure crate. Every movement was deliberate, every step calculated, as though they were handling something far more fragile and dangerous than an ordinary relic. Liam's guilt gnawed at him as he observed the scene. If only he hadn't been so careless, none of this would have happened. Marcus, meanwhile, was busy answering questions from a group of investigators. His uniform was dust-streaked, and his face bore the weariness of someone who had endured far too much in a single day. Despite his exhaustion, he recounted the events clearly, leaving out no detail. When asked about Liam's role in uncovering the chest, Marcus hesitated briefly before speaking. "He didn't mean harm," Marcus said finally, glancing toward Liam. "It was curiosity, not malice. But we all saw what happened when the orb came out. That thing, it's powerful." The investigators nodded gravely, jotting down notes as they listened. One of them, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a clipboard, turned her attention to Liam next. She approached him cautiously, her expression neutral but probing. "Can you describe what you felt when you touched the orb?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Liam hesitated, unsure where to begin. How could he explain the tingling warmth that spread through his body, the visions that played out like a movie, or the overwhelming sense of dread that followed? "It was alive," he said finally, choosing his words carefully. "Like it had a mind of its own. And those images, it showed me things. Battles, people, places I'd never seen before. Then there was this vision of destruction. It felt like a warning." The investigator studied him closely, her pen poised above her clipboard. "A warning about what?" she pressed gently. "I don't know," Liam admitted, shaking his head. "Maybe about messing with things we don't understand. Or maybe it was showing me what could happen if the orb stays out of its chest for too long." He paused, glancing toward the monument. "Whatever it is, it's not just some old artifact. It's important, dangerous, even." The investigator nodded thoughtfully, making a few final notes before stepping away. As she rejoined her team, Liam noticed Marcus walking toward him. The guard's usual stern demeanor had softened slightly, replaced by a look of quiet reflection. "They'll take good care of it," Marcus said, gesturing toward the crate containing the chest. "People who know what they're doing." Liam nodded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't over. The orb's power still lingered in his thoughts, its glow imprinted on his memory. What if it wasn't done with him? What if uncovering it had set something larger into motion? "Listen," Marcus continued, breaking the silence. "You got lucky today. Things could have gone much worse." His tone wasn't accusatory, but there was an undercurrent of seriousness that made Liam straighten up. "Next time you feel the urge to poke around somewhere you shouldn't, think twice. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, at least not by amateurs." Liam met Marcus's gaze, nodding slowly. "I get it," he said quietly. "And I'm sorry. For everything." Marcus gave him a curt nod, accepting the apology without further comment. Then, after a brief pause, he added, "Just promise me one thing. Don't let today be forgotten. Learn from it." As evening fell and the authorities began packing up their equipment, Liam lingered near the monument a little longer. The once lively structure now seemed quieter, almost mournful, as if it carried the weight of centuries within its stones. Though the chest was gone, safely transported to a facility for study, Liam couldn't help but wonder if the orb's influence remained. Its whispers might have faded, but its lesson echoed loudly in his mind. History, he realized, wasn't just a collection of dusty relics or faded carvings. It was alive, breathing, waiting to teach those willing to listen. And sometimes it demanded respect, not fear, but reverence. As Liam walked away, he vowed never to forget what he'd learned that day. Curiosity may drive humanity forward, but wisdom ensures we survive to see tomorrow. As Liam walked away from the monument, the fading sunlight cast long shadows across the ground, painting the ancient stones in hues of orange and gold. The day had been unlike anything he'd ever experienced, chaotic, surreal, and humbling all at once. He could still feel the weight of the orb's energy lingering in his mind, its glow etched into his memory like a vivid dream that refused to fade. Each step he took felt heavier than the last, not because of physical exhaustion, but because of the lessons he was carrying with him. The teasing sandwich incident now seemed so trivial in hindsight, almost laughable compared to the events that followed. What had started as a playful prank had spiraled into something far greater, a brush with history, power, and consequence. Liam realized how easily his actions could have led to disaster. If Marcus hadn't intervened when he did, if the orb hadn't been returned to its chest, who knows what might have happened. The vision of destruction flashed in his mind again, sending a shiver down his spine. It wasn't just a warning. It was a reminder of humanity's fragility and responsibility. By the time Liam reached the gates of the monument grounds, the crowd had dispersed, leaving behind only scattered footprints and faint traces of the chaos that had unfolded. A few stray tourists lingered nearby, chatting animatedly about what they'd witnessed. Some speculated about hidden treasures, while others whispered about curses and supernatural forces. Liam overheard snippets of their conversations but didn't join in. His thoughts were too tangled, too personal, to share with strangers. As he adjusted the strap of his backpack, Liam glanced back one last time at the monument. It stood silently against the darkening sky, its weathered surface unchanged by the day's events, or so it seemed. To Liam, however, it felt different. The structure no longer appeared as just an old relic of the past. It was alive, breathing, watching. It had shared a piece of its story with him, and in return, it had asked for respect. He owed it that much, and more. Marcus stood near the entrance, overseeing the final cleanup efforts. When he noticed Liam pausing at the gate, he gave a small nod, acknowledging the tourist's presence without saying a word. There was no animosity in his gaze, only a quiet understanding. They had both been part of something extraordinary today, something neither would soon forget. Though their encounter had begun with tension and teasing, it had ended with mutual respect and perhaps even a hint of camaraderie. "Take care," Marcus called out, his voice steady but kind. "And remember what I said." Liam nodded, offering a faint smile in response. "I will," he replied softly before turning away. As he stepped through the gates and onto the bustling street beyond, the noise of the city enveloped him, the honking of cars, the chatter of pedestrians, the hum of everyday life. Yet none of it felt quite the same anymore. The world seemed smaller somehow, yet infinitely more complex. Every building, every person, every moment carried echoes of history, waiting to be noticed or ignored. That night, as Liam sat alone in his hotel room, he pulled out his journal and began writing. He documented everything: the teasing, the discovery, the orb's glowing light, and the visions it had shown him. But most importantly, he wrote about what he had learned, that curiosity must always be tempered with caution, and that respecting the past is key to protecting the future. By the time he finished, dawn was breaking outside his window, casting a soft glow over the city skyline. When Liam left the city the next morning, he carried more than souvenirs in his backpack. He carried a newfound appreciation for history, a deeper sense of humility, and a promise to himself to approach life with both wonder and wisdom. Years later, whenever he recounted the tale of the orb and the ancient monument, people often asked if he regretted opening the chest. His answer was always the same: "No, I don't regret learning what I did, but I'll never forget the cost of that lesson." And so, The story became a part of him, a reminder that some mysteries are best left untouched, but others demand to be understood. For Liam, it wasn't just about the orb or the monument. It was about the choices we make, the consequences we face, and the legacy we leave behind. History may belong to the past, but its lessons shape our present and guide our future.